Uh,
All right. Hey, Og, when you edit these, do you edit out the beginning with the waiting period? Or do you just do it as is? You're not going to answer me? Or are you going to type the message? You just do it organically? Okay, cool. Well, that means that some YouTube listener, even though no guests have arrived yet. Oh, I see some guests have already arrived. Okay, that's good. Well, I was going to say some YouTube listener is going to hear me talk about nothing at all. Welcome, everybody. Christopher and Hari and JT and me here and Richard and all the other folks shuffling in. Howdy. Hi, Christopher. Um, Let me just jump to the next slide with my questions that I typically ask if anyone feels like they want to share. No pressure. Probably if I say no pressure, don't share, nobody will. But if I put too much pressure, you guys won't want to share either. So I could switch and become very like a professor and be like, everyone must introduce themselves upon entering and then shame everyone to doing it. Just kidding. But if you want to, let me know where you are. Hi, Sabrina. Welcome in. Probably when you welcome someone right when they come in, Connecticut, that sounds nice. They probably can't hear you because you have to click that button that connects the audio. So I'll say it again. Hi, Sabrina. Welcome in. Welcome in. Welcome. We won't wait too long to get started today. I think we'll jump in pretty quickly. JT, welcome from Connecticut. Is it raining up in Connecticut? It's the weather here in Brooklyn, New York is just awful. It's cold and rainy and miserable. Feels first rain in 3 months. Yeah, it's true. It is the first rain pretty much. I think maybe yesterday it rained a tiny bit or something, but yeah, first rain in months. And I assume you live on a farm, JT, and you got your crops are just yearning for water. Just kidding. I'm sure you are a B2B marketer, a salesperson. I could only imagine. Okay, we'll give it another maybe 120 seconds, and then we're going to jump in to the topic of the day, which is skip the pitch using cold email for sales without selling. Richard, Chicago, just got your 4 inches of snow. Wow, it really is kind of raining all across. New Jersey, cold, outlook, no response, issue problem, no AI. Okay, cool. Cool. Nice. So you've been using Outlook for sending? There's some updates coming with huge issues with Outlook blocking domains. Yeah, sure. Brooklyn represent. That's right. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of chatter around Outlook. Outlook is actually changing some rules around their sending. So towards the end of the Q&A, we can jump into that. Og, do you want to see if Og's on my team? I'm not talking to someone random. Og, do you want to see if Dame is going to be joining or if Dame is already here? It might be useful to have Dame's input, one of our technicians. Cool. Even just the back half of this would be good. All right, just 60 seconds, and then we'll jump into it. Cool, let's do it. All right. So I usually start these presentations with this slide. And if you've been to one of these before or you're watching these on YouTube or something after the fact, you can skip this because it's pretty much the same thing I say almost every time. But I want to speak just very briefly about who Senders is. So we consider ourselves a full puzzle email deliverability service. We're also a do-it-for-you email deliverability service. There's a lot of services out there that give you bits and pieces of the deliverability puzzle. We strive to do the whole thing, and we do it as a service. And the reason why it's important we do it as a service is there's a lot of variability on a per client basis. So we're able to not try to shoehorn all of our clients into one particular thing that just fits the particular piece of software we built, but actually kind of look at it all more holistically. We handle cold email mainly, a lot of volume on cold email, tens of millions of emails a year, but we also help our clients with corporate mail, marketing mail, transactional email. And I mean, primarily on the technical side. So because cold emails are real bread and butter, it means that we are very well aware of all the issues and challenges that come with cold email. But because of the way that we do it, we actually are insulated from a lot of the issues that we see happen outside in the world. So for example, we don't send any emails from Google or Microsoft at all. We warm IP addresses to the tune of millions of emails. We only use aged domains and a whole host of other things that we do exclusively to make it so our clients have a lot of longevity and a very healthy sending environment and can send emails at a much higher volume. And most of the things that we see happening out in the information space for cold email is very short-term thinking. So we see a lot of people have a lot of problems with short-term issues that we don't face or our clients don't face. So that is to say that I'm the CEO and founder. We have a team of technicians, some of whom will join later and can speak through specific questions. And feel free with any questions about email deliverability, even though the first part of this, I'm not specifically going to be talking about email deliverability. But yeah, email deliverability, it's a wild thing. And we have a pretty solid handle on it. And if you're struggling with any part of it, please set up a call with one of the members of our team to chat it all through. Cool. So today, this is what I mentioned a second ago, just there are 4 elements of email under our control, and we have our own way of doing this kind of stuff that is pretty unique. I'll maybe jump back to this later, and now I'll jump into the main topic of the webinar. So in the same way that hunger is the best sauce, a steady stream of interested replies and an engaged audience is typically the best way to keep your deliverability healthy. And that's assuming that all the basics are met. So it's sort of like hunger is the best sauce, but if the food is really not appetizing in any way, it doesn't really matter how hungry you are. If you're sending emails that are attractive and interesting and people are replying to them with interest, your deliverability tends to be healthier for longer. So the purpose of today's webinar is to talk through the specific techniques that we've seen recently that help our clients get a steady stream of interested replies. And these apply to the clients that we did the copywriting for and really helped, and the ones that came to us with a working, functional, outbound machine and just said, hey, we want your team to handle the email deliverability side. I think that the dream is selling without selling. People love to be sold to. They just don't really know it. Well, people don't really love to be sold to, but there are things that they do like. And this isn't a really revolutionary idea, but it's pretty true. The dream of sales is to sell without selling. And that's part of the magic of, let's say, inbound marketing or something when someone comes to you, for sure. But on top of that, I think the dream is buying without being sold to. So it works both ways. You want to sell without selling, and they want to buy without feeling like they're being sold to. So this comes to the issue that we see typically with cold email, is that typically the sellers, so the person sending the cold email, think about the value proposition in terms of what their product or service does or can do. And they say that is the value of the product being offered. So the emails present a value proposition that, although true, is very much a sales proposition. And that only resonates with a certain kind of buyer, maybe someone that's specifically in the headspace of being ready to buy, or they're already comparing products or services that are somewhat similar. So then they think, okay, like if you're in the market for a cold email outbound agency, maybe the value proposition of the agency becomes very important. But by and large, you are cold emailing people who you need to get them into the headspace of buying or being interested at all prior to them being in a position to actually assess your value proposition. So it's okay to present your value proposition in a very narrow sense, but it challenges the target to decide if the value proposition fits their needs. And sometimes a cold email isn't enough time or space for them to even know that or assess that. So they don't really respond positively because they're like, do I need this? Is this something I really care about? My schedule's a little bit busy. I'll let this go. They're not thinking, yes, this makes sense right away. So we like to help our clients think about value proposition in a far wider sense. It says value proposition in the widest sense, not the wildest sense, although you could probably replace it with the word wild if you want to. So today we're specifically talking about what we mean when we talk about value proposition in the widest sense. So how can you position your cold emails to your prospects in a way that widens the likelihood or increases the likelihood of them responding with an affirmative, with them opting in to hearing more from you? All right. All the words I chose today start with the letter C, mainly because it's a little bit fun to do it that way. These are just some ideas that we've seen work. And you could probably replace them with any other words or really riff on this a lot and come up with a lot of new ways to think about it. But I'm going to go through some of the ways that we think about it here and that we've seen our clients succeed with. So connection is the first one. If you have a sender who is a very credible person, they have a track record, they've done interesting things, it's possible that the connection with that person is the most attractive value proposition that you have. So an example of that would be if a really interesting person that's worked in supply chain for a number of years at large companies, who has standing in the community to a certain extent, is doing the cold emailing, and that person is also the one who's doing the sales call. Well, perhaps the best way to position this is, I would like to talk to you, and here's a little bit about me that makes me a compelling person to talk to. Would you be interested in having a talk? By the way, here's what I'm working on. You very well may find that a lot of people reply with interest, not necessarily because they're interested in the value proposition of what you're selling, but because they're interested in that person. They're interested in the connection. So that can be a very powerful driver. Community is the second one. Community works similarly to connection, but it's a wider basis. We've seen clients who have a Slack community or some other form of community, or inviting people to get together, whether the invite is a specific invite or it's more general, like, would you be interested in invite, have a lot of success. And certain people in certain kinds of places, in certain kind of ways, are really attracted to community if they feel that the community is genuine. So this means that the cold email isn't value proposition about your product or service, but it's, hey, we're getting people together in a specific way, or we have a Slack community where we share these specific things, or we're doing a roundtable discussion where everyone's going to get a chance to speak, but would you be interested in joining? So the value proposition becomes some feeling or sense of community. This works another way, where if you are also a member of the same community, even in a wide sense, as the person you're emailing, you can use community as a way to have a conversation with them and to have the connection with them, as the previous slide said. So, for example, I can have a lot of success emailing other company founders who work, let's say, in Brooklyn, where I live in New York. They might say, okay, I see that there's a community element here, and sure, I'll connect with you, even though I'm not specifically interested in your product or service value proposition, at least right now, but I am interested in the community aspect. Continuity, this is a little bit different from the first two. Continuity has to do with you having an understanding of what is going on in their industry and your product or service fitting in to a continuous story. So an example of this that's a little bit obvious would be if there's a big change in an FDA rule and you have a product suite or service or something that fits that rule, you're providing continuity to them. So you email them and say, you're in the seafood industry, the FDA has new rules like this and that are coming into effect in 2025. We can help you with that continuous feeling. So that is to say that no matter what your product or service is, if you can find an area where using your product or service or learning about your product or service connects the dot inside your prospect's brain. And this is a continuation of a line of thinking they're already having. That can be very effective. If you use an example in our industry, there's already been some mention of it here, but Outlook is having specific issues. If we were doing cold email to cold emailers, and we said, if you're having trouble specifically with Outlook, we have our own approach to solving this that we've been doing to the tune of millions and millions of emails. I'd love to tell you about it. If that continuity connects in their brain, they're much more likely to reply with interest, even though the actual value proposition, if you look at our website or whatever, isn't, beat Outlook sending limits or something like that at all. But it provides continuity, and that continuity is the attractive thing for them. Confidence. Confidence is a really interesting word because you can convey confidence, you can give someone confidence. So an example of this would be if you were a HubSpot agency or you built a HubSpot tool and you were tracking who recently added HubSpot Pixel to their company website, and you sent them a note that said, I saw you recently added the HubSpot Pixel. HubSpot's a really great tool, and you made a really good choice. We have an extension or we have a service that relates to that. You're actually showing them, you're giving them a boost of confidence, like they made the right decision in what they did, and you're here to support. It's the opposite of a sort of fear-based thing of like, oh, most people never utilize HubSpot enough, and you're going to fail in your HubSpot implementation if you don't work with us. It's sort of the opposite, where you're deliberately finding ways to give them confidence. Another way would be if you were emailing people who recently joined a job, a CTO who recently joined. You might send them a note that says, like, congratulations on your new job. That's confidence boost. That's a big, you've come a long way since you started as an engineering intern at IBM all those years ago, another confidence boost. And the organization you joined is really working on really interesting things, another confidence boost. So that's a little bit over the top, and oftentimes people don't really like the smoke blowing aspect of this, but having an element of confidence where your email is supposed to provide them confidence simply by reading it can also lead to healthy things, especially if that's combined with some of the other aspects like community and things like that. Curiosity, this one can get a little tricky. Folks like me who have been in the cold email game a long time, I've been doing cold email professionally since 2015, and I started this company in 2016, which it's not that long ago for me, but it's a long time ago for people that started doing cold email, let's say in 2022. You used to be able to get really far simply by generating any level of curiosity. You could write a one-line email that just said something like, we built a new CRM for small business. Interested? And people would be like, sure, I'm interested. The world's changed a lot since then. That isn't to say that curiosity still doesn't have a pull for people. I think that you have to work harder to contextualize and direct the curiosity if you're going to be using curiosity as a wedge to get people in. An example of this is if you have a really great case study, you might pitch your value proposition or community services or whatever it is you're doing. And then as a curiosity pull, you could say, and if we connect, I'd be happy to show you an unpublished case study from a client that's somewhat similar to yours that we don't normally publish, or has more information that we wouldn't normally show. So you're sort of doing like almost like a secret thing that you're comfortable talking about, but you really wouldn't be cold emailing it out. You wouldn't really be publishing it on the internet. So you can pique their curiosity in that way. Another way to pique curiosity is to tell them that you're going to talk specifically about other companies in their industry that you have information about, even if you're not going to be sharing private information. But if you have an understanding, they're like, yeah, I'm curious to hear what this person thinks about what's going on with this area. So you're using curiosity as a way to get them interested. Curation is the next one. if you're a player in your industry, that means that you're also looking at things in the industry, and you might actually have access to or have seen more interesting things than they've seen. So sometimes by using something that you curated or you're looking at or you're involved in is enough to get them interested in what you're working on. So an example of this might be if there are 5 or 6 events in your industry coming up, and your team wrote a blog post about which events you're going to, you recommend people go to for this year, you're curating something in the industry that you could then present to them. So you might include that in the email to show that you're not only someone in the same industry, but you're thinking through all of the things in the industry and you're picking out things that matter. Another simple way to do this could be you could make a list of like the 5 most interesting articles about your space. So let's give like a sort of real example. We had a client that was doing an AI-based service, AI build-outs, let's say. A cold email that could work is you're emailing your target audience and you say, can I send over the 5 links of articles that we think get it really right about how the next 2 years of AI is going to pan out? Well, that's actually kind of interesting because you're not offering them one article, and maybe one of those articles that you're presenting was written by you, which is cool. Maybe that's the first one you put in the list. That's cool. But you're using curiosity and sort of showing that you're an expert in the space by curating something on their behalf. So that's the next idea. Credibility is important in almost every facet. But in this case, credibility is not necessarily attached to the first person. Like the connection one, it's about you trying to connect with them. Credibility can be much wider. Credibility can be about you making sure that in the email, they know that you're a credible person or entity to be sending this. One of the things that I find in a lot of younger cold emailers is they either don't have a lot of credibility, at least in the normal sense, or they are not comfortable talking about the credibility they have. So it's very value proposition, like we talked about a second ago, oriented. Hi, I'm Tom. I built the thing that does this. Would you like to see it? And part of me, potentially because I'm a millennial, part of me says, well, who are you? Should I care that you built this? Is this a ubiquitous thing? There are other people building the same thing? Like, why should I care that it's you who did it? So making sure you bring credibility into the email can work tremendously to help further the value proposition and really make it connect with the people that you're emailing. As a final note, we could just go on forever and go through the whole, every single C that ever existed, every single word that starts with C who ever existed. But to sort of put a cap on this, there's a feeling that people have that cost and time savings are really important to bring into cold emails. We like to tell our clients that cost and time savings are not really what is being sold, except for in very specific situations. Rather, these are what I consider a second order effect, meaning there are a lot of ways to reduce cost and time that have nothing to do with your value proposition. And if you push a client or a customer on what is the thing that really brings their cost down and saves them time, probably they're not going to think of your product or service anyway. And the same thing goes for your prospect. So for example, if you chase down a CEO of a company and said, what's the one thing you're going to do in 2025 to reduce costs and increase your efficiency? They might say something like, find a new nanny who arrives on time. They're not necessarily going to be like a new CRM. Like that's the thing. So I think that it's better to present cost and time savings as a second order effect rather than a first order effect. And that means that it's better to present your value proposition, whatever it is. And if cost and time savings are a result of that proposition, it's obviously okay to mention that. But putting that front and center doesn't necessarily register as something unique or interesting in any way. Cool. That is all the material for today. let's jump into the questions. And also keep them coming, by the way. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to jump back to this slide and talk a little bit about email deliverability, because I know that most folks here are mainly interested in email deliverability stuff. And as I start to talk about this slide, feel free with any questions, concerns, and then we can take a minute after this to talk about what we think is going on with Microsoft and Outlook. And I asked Dame, who's one of our technicians, to join. He can also speak to some of what's going on. So what we always tell everybody is that cold email itself is very simple. And there's basically 4 elements to it. There's domains, IPs, DNS, and then all of the email usage. What we do as senders is not easily replicable by people on their own. And the reason is we do a lot of things that we know from the tens of millions of emails we sent work really well, but they're not necessarily the most efficient to do on your own. And that makes sense because we're professionals at this, and this is basically all that we do. And our clients rely on us for this specific thing. They don't really rely on us for advice on how they can do it themselves, if that makes sense. So some of the things that we do are we only use aged domains. So no new domains straight off the rack. And aged domains can bear a lot more sending volume and have a much higher reputation overall. And you can build a reputation on them and you can sustain a reputation for longer. In terms of IPs, we only use it very, very well warmed and very tightly managed IP pools for our clients. That means literally millions of emails have been sent through most of our IPs before we put them in to be used for a client. And if we are putting them into action for a client, we're monitoring them very closely. And then IPs that are in action, we're rotating them out if we see any issue with them or any decrease in quality for the IP. So it's a lot of active management of IPs. We also don't allow sending to gmail.com or other public mail addresses. So we only allow emails to business addresses. This has to do with the fact that gmail.com and Yahoo type email addresses tend to be more sensitive, and they tend to be consumer emails, not business emails. And consumer email and business email even has a different legal framework for how they're thought about and handled. So we only allow our clients to send to business accounts, so we don't do any gmail.com sending. And the last one, on the 4th one, your email usage, we work really closely with our clients to enforce cold email deliverability best practices. That means that we want them to be canned spam compliant, meaning we want them to have an unsubscribe link that works. We want them to have the address of their company they're sending. We want them to be sending from a real person, not from a fictitious person. We want them to avoid very clear spam keywords, et cetera, et cetera. And we work very closely with clients to make sure we reduce all those things that we know get in the way of email deliverability. And all this combined makes for a very stable sending environment. And that's really what we want. The most stable environment with the fewest parts. And because of this, our clients are able to send 80,000 plus emails a month on single domains with almost no interruptions, if that all makes sense. Let me jump back down to the Q&A slide just to signal to everyone that we're in Q&A time. Cool, let's see. So Kathleen says, I'm an Apollo user for several clients and working on perfecting my messaging. It's tough. It is tough. Yes, that's a good point. Best thinking I've seen to date is how to think about the buyer. Question I have, though, is scaling these messages one-to-many. In terms of LinkedIn, no, I'm specifically talking about cold email, but most of the stuff can be applied to LinkedIn as well. I think that's pretty safe. That's pretty safe to say. Keep in mind that I'm not actually speaking about customizing messages to individual senders in this structure that I talked about and all these words that start with C. I'm actually talking about a more general sense of the feeling that these messages are conveying or the content of what they're conveying. And we found that this kind of bank shot email where you're not doing a direct value proposition email can actually be very effective with almost all of these words that we're talking about here, with connection, community, continuity, confidence, curiosity, curation, credibility. You don't actually need a very specific one. And oftentimes, if you're trying to guess specifically what will resonate with a specific person, you guess wrong and they reject it. So in some ways, it can be better to be more general, unless you're going to go whole hog and actually write a very individualized email for every single person, if that makes sense. Does that answer at all, Kathleen, or any follow-up questions you have? So how do you decide which one? That's a very good question. For one thing, you definitely should be testing different targeting, different messaging. And sometimes you find that one type of messaging outperforms, but it doesn't necessarily work in mass. So an idea of this would be, we're coming up towards the end of the year. At the end of the year, you have a break in December, and then the year starts again in January. One thing that we found historically is a lot of people, their calendar is pretty blank in January, and it's pretty full in December. So simply by deferring the meeting until January, they might even agree to it. So an example of this might be like, we're helping people, whatever the product or service is, kick off 2025 strong, blah, blah, blah. Would you be open to a chat in early 2025 to talk about XYZ, whatever the thing that you've chosen that resonates most with the product or service you're selling? People might say, sure. And then you can almost grab anytime you want in January. So what I'm saying is that you're looking at the calendar as an idea. You're looking at what is going on in the industry that you're sending the email from, what is going on in the industry of what they're doing, what seems to make sense and is sort of a low barrier in their brain to agreeing to, and you're going with those ideas. An example of this in the negative would be if it's a first-time founder who has no credibility really on their own and being connected to them isn't really valuable, then I wouldn't choose something to do with connectivity. If you are working with someone or your company has a big Slack community full of interesting stuff, well, then the connection and community side of this might actually be a really useful place to start, because you know what you're inviting them into and you can talk specifically about that, if that makes sense. Does that help a little bit, Kathleen? Hope so. Petra asked, Petra asked two questions. Petra asked, how does warm, safe IPs work, or is it monitoring? IP addresses are not all created equal. Well, in their inception, they are created equal, but by the time they get into a place where you can use them, they're not really created equal. They all have their own history and they all have their own place. They all come from some block of IPs and they all have their own sort of flavor, so to speak. When you warm IP addresses, you're sending traffic through them and you're seeing how the wider internet is responding to those IP addresses. So there's really, the most efficient way to warm an IP address is to send emails through it. And unlike domains, IP addresses require a lot more emails over a longer period of time to be deemed safe. So they require just a lot of emails and to keep them in good, well, to get them into good standing. And then if an IP address has some sort of issue, oftentimes the quality of their sends falls off very quickly. That's oftentimes what you're seeing with Outlook sending. With Outlook sending, Microsoft has given you good IP addresses to send from. You feel good. Then all of a sudden, one day, it goes really bad, really fast. And that's because Microsoft has moved you to a poor IP sending pool. So they switch you to an IP that was far worse because of the way that they're punishing you basically for not liking the way you're using their service. And you see a very steep drop off. Same thing if your IP is in good standing and then it suddenly goes into bad standing, the quality of send drops off very quickly. And in that case, you need to rotate out that IP address or switch to a different pool of IP addresses if that's what you're doing. That makes sense. So Petra says, figuring out the personal angle, would you say going with the first email being friendly? Hi, I'm Xing Y. I just wanted to say I love your post on LinkedIn, and then following up later with the sales approach. I don't. So in the practice that Senders does when we help clients, we actually don't do personal emails that are customized to that extent. I get a lot of messages personally that have that kind of thing. I love the post you wrote. I don't see there's anything wrong with sending that kind of message if it's genuine. Keep in mind that the switch to the sales pitch can feel very abrupt. And if my post that I made doesn't directly relate to your value proposition, it feels really weird. It's like, I loved your post on email and, deliverability. By the way, have you thought about, renewing your air conditioners for your office? I'm like, how does this relate? It doesn't, this sort of creates more friction in my brain. So in some ways it could make sense to do a value proposition that you're trying to sell, and then use the fact that you read a blog post of theirs as a way to get them more likely to respond. Because then at least you're feeling more genuine. So like, P.S. I read that art poster. That was really clever. It seems a little bit more natural to me. I think that running it through a sort of naturalness test might help. Cool. Let's see. Christopher. Curious your thoughts on AI messaging. Are you as fearful as I am that at the end of the day, everyone's going to be producing the same email? Well, that's a really interesting. I did the last presentation in this series on, I think it was the last one on AI and messaging and some of the thoughts therein about how AI is going to play into this. And I encourage you to, I think it's on our YouTube channel. You can go and watch that after. So I won't repeat all the things that I talked about in that presentation. I probably couldn't even do it from memory, even if I tried. I would say that the fear, okay, so on a very basic level, AI in messaging could start to create other types of problems. For one, most of the AI messaging that gets sent now, a lot of it is really, really junk. I mean, I have lots of examples in my inbox where they get my company name right, but it's a different senders, or it's just all twisted up in sort of weird ways. Or the AI knows a lot of information about me, but it doesn't understand what is unique or interesting. So I get an email that says something like, oh, I see you're in Brooklyn, New York. I was in Brooklyn, earlier in the year, and I ate pizza or something like that. And you're like, okay, like that's so weird. But from the AI's perspective, they're given a prompt like, try to relate to something that has to do with where they live or something like that. So it's like, Brooklyn, okay, I'm looking near his location, lots of pizza shops, I'll mention that. Well, any normal human being would never be like, I ate pizza. Have you ever heard of pizza? Like, that seems a really like weird thing to do. So I think that the oddball random stuff is part of the problem with AI messaging now. In a very limited basis, it can be very useful if you're trying to synthesize a lot of information into one sentence, or you're trying to figure out who your prospect might be selling to and sort of deriving that from a lot of information on their website or something like that. But most of the successful instances that I've seen put a human in the loop, meaning a human is looking through the variable that's going to be put in by AI and using a sort of human gut check to assess it. Those are my general thoughts on the AI messaging side. Now, I believe if you do a lot of this other stuff correctly, like you correctly assess which angle the prospect is interested in resonating with you about, you don't need a lot of customization. We're seeing clients do 3, 4, 5,000 emails a day with very healthy interested reply rates where they haven't customized it at all. And oftentimes the customization won't make any sense anyway if you're emailing someone that's somewhat junior in the organization. If you're emailing into, let's say, the HR department, does a random HR associate have a lot of history enough for you to feed it into the AI and get something clever to say? Like, no, they might have been out of school 2 or 3 years ago, and the only thing you know is that they went to, the University of Ohio or something. Like, that's it. So what are you going to say? Like, I don't even know what the sports team is there, but like, go that sports team. It's like, that seems really weird and like unrelated. So I would say that in that instance, it's not really super potent or useful. So I would say that that sort of level of customization probably isn't going to be helpful or even necessary. Using AI to filter who you're going to be messaging could be a more useful way to do that. But in that sense, you wouldn't need to incorporate any of that messaging into the actual email itself. Cool. Any other questions? Any questions at all? JT, do you want to put a little bit of meat on your comment about having huge issues with Outlook blocking domains? If not, I can pass the mic to Dame from my team to just speak freely about overall what we're seeing or what people are talking about and what might be happening with Outlook. And it looks to me like there are folks in here that are trying to send from Outlook, as Christopher is. And that's different from JT, who's having issues with Outlook receiving emails. So maybe, Dame, you can speak to both sides of this, folks who are trying to send from Outlook and things that might be happening, and then people who feel that they're being blocked by Outlook on the receiving side.
Okay, I'm not really seeing their scenarios. Like I don't see the questions.
A lot of detail on the scenario, but maybe you can. Oh, there's a message here. Okay, JT.
No issues for years.
Good. Wow, years. That's great. What is the effect you're seeing, JT? JT said our sending was at a decent volume with no issues for years, and as of midsummer, it has turned upside down. We use multiple domains and spread our emails over 400 plus seconds, et cetera, with continued issues. JT, when you say you're seeing issues, what is the effect? Are you seeing a decrease in open rates, and that was something you were tracking? Are you seeing far more bounces? Are you seeing a specific kind of bounce? What are you seeing?
Sorry. Yeah, and just to share a little bit, like a lot of people are saying like issues are occurring on Microsoft side and whatnot. Microsoft has always been a harder one to reach, and it's not just related to just that being like Microsoft itself, but it's also that most of the clients, well, not the clients, the contacts that use Microsoft Office are usually bigger companies that have like additional security systems in place, that are having even internal security systems in place. Even if someone wants to reply from those emails, they are more or less prevented because they want to keep everything within the organization. So, and with this, I'm not saying like try not to send to Outlook, but when you do it, usually what we have seen work is a bit more plain emails. Definitely try not to use. Yeah, and I can touch on the open rates, which I would say don't track opens. But yeah, we escalated with Microsoft, and long story short, they said it was from my mail warmer template triggering.
Let me read this out loud. So we started with Microsoft, and long story short, they said it was from my mail warmer template triggering it, etc. JT, it's a really funny thing how almost all issues with email, people are very eager to tell you that they know what the problem is, and they're very eager to pass the problem on to something else or somewhere else. Yeah. It's possible that if you were sending from Microsoft, you crossed over some magical threshold and they moved you to a bad IP sending pool. If you're not sending from Microsoft, it's possible that you have been emailing for a long time without issues, which fundamentally means that maybe your email copy hasn't been rotated in a while. And at a certain point, the same email in the system crossed some sort of threshold where they say, this email's been being sent a lot and the spam rate is slightly higher. Let's start blocking these emails. That's possible. It's possible that your email warming tool interfered in some way with a magical balance that you had going. it's possible that policy changes inside Microsoft have shifted to where you weren't crossing some threshold. And you understand, there's a lot of, typically it's very, it's not a specific one
What
source of the,
what are you using for warm up?
yeah, JT, what do you, Kathleen, I'll elaborate on the open rate issue in a second.
Mail toaster. Yeah, we never particularly use those, but I doubt it's the warm up template is the same, because for the most part, all these warm up services generate a ton of different variations of the email templates. So unless it was something related to the tracking code inside the template for the, for the replies filtering and whatnot, I would say that would probably be the only thing, but I strongly doubt that it was related to something that the warm-up was doing. It's just that ISPs in general hate the warm-up services, and that's why they will try to spin everything up as if it's the warm-up's fault.
And the reason why they don't like warm-up services, I think in a past webinar in the same series, we went deeper on email warming. And I have a LinkedIn post I made specifically about email warming that if you look on my LinkedIn, you can find where I go into some detail on it. But there's a lot of reasons why email service providers don't like email warming. And I think primarily it's because they look like botnets. Their emails passing between two entities without anyone controlling them. And that is a very strange thing. You could argue that they don't like it because they're trying to get around their spam filtration, but I actually think it's much more fundamental of just, it's not allowed in the acceptable use policies or in the way that they typically like to use these things, to have things be emailing back and forth without their control. So it's just a kind of a strange thing. And then there's also security issues involved with having a third party that's sending emails on your behalf in that sort of ping pong way. It's very, very odd thing. Oh, thanks for linking to my good old LinkedIn. Og, do you want to find the specific post and link to it? I think it's called "Email Warming is Totally Ingenious and Totally Dumb" or something like that. Kathleen, in terms of open rates, so open rates have always been a sort of faulty metric because they rely on very specific things to happen after the email gets received by the person you're sending it to in order for the open to be tracked. So this is going to be a little bit of like for those who know, this is going to be a little bit silly, but I'll explain it anyway. Email service providers or your sort of mail client is just a tiny web browser. And an email is just like a little bit of instructions on how to display the mail with text in it. So when you open up an email, it's basically just opening up a little tiny web page. And in order for to know what to put in the email, it has to come from the internet. So when the images and text load, especially the images has to come from somewhere. So it has to tell the internet to give you the images. And when it goes to the internet to say, hey, give me the images, it also sends a note back to you saying this email was opened. That's like on a very simple basis. So the way email open tracking typically works is you put a 1 pixel by 1 pixel picture in the image, in the email. And then when the email loads, it sends a note to the internet saying, what's the picture that's supposed to go here? And there's no picture. It's just, there's nothing there, but it uses that as an opportunity to let the internet know, hey, this email was opened. So it's a very simple process for Google and Microsoft to stop that from happening. They basically put a little banner that says, there are images hidden in this, or there are images here. Would you like to look at the images? And people can read the email without loading the images. So they just don't read them. That's always been available and always been happening, and there are other reasons why open rates are faulty, but just to focus on the most recent one. What happened recently is Google started to not load images automatically for more of their users, making it seem like open rates were very, very low because that little pixel wasn't firing back to tell you. So that's why at a certain point over the summer, we decided, as well as many other cold emailers out there, who weren't tracking open rates, who were still tracking open rates, to just stop tracking open rates entirely, not even sending the pixel out to track it. So that's the reason why open rates are faulty. That's sort of the root of their faultiness, or one of the roots of their faultiness. And then why we responded with turning off open tracking for almost all of our clients. If that makes sense.
Yeah, ideally no images in the email.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, at low volumes in certain scenarios, I'm sure there are people that can get away with still sending images. I don't believe in hard and fast rules, and we encounter people all the time that are doing something slightly different and it seems to be working okay for them. And I think that goes to the sort of unique nature of it. It's sort of like if you ask 50, 92-year-olds how they live so long, at least 10 of them are going to say a shot of whiskey every morning or something like that. Even if it's not, goes against advice, like maybe, who knows, maybe that is helpful for a certain type of person. So there's a world in which someone might have been sending images very consistently for many, many years, and the images are supporting their deliverability in a way that we don't imagine. When we work on clients and we're trying to help them scale consistently, we don't allow them to do images, and we don't do open tracking unless there's a specific reason why we would need to. Image and signature can work the same way. It's still an image. It still needs to be loaded from somewhere. So I would say that it oftentimes can have the same effect. One of the benefits of images and signatures is that if they do load it, it can help make your company or service look more credible. So sometimes that is an attractive thing. And it also is a pretty natural thing for someone to want to see the signature. So they might actually click load images just to see the signature. So that could have a sort of positive effect, although it could also have the negative effect of being an image and that reducing deliverability effectiveness to a certain extent. Petra asked about benchmark for response rates. I think when I was very early in cold email and I had just gotten started, thanks. Noted, Kathleen. Thank you for your question. I appreciate it. Back to Petra's question about benchmark for response rates. Back years ago when I first started doing cold email, and I had done cold email for 3, 4, 5 clients, I probably had pretty clear, firm ideas about what is a good open rate back when we were tracking it, or what is a good response rate, or what is a good interested response rate, that kind of thing. But after doing it for literally hundreds of companies, and we can currently do it for 75 plus companies right now, it really, really varies. We have clients that consistently have 10% interested reply rates with very attractive products, and they get interested replies all day long, or very attractive value propositions. And we have clients that get 0.1% interested reply rates, but it's enough to sustain their business. So I would say that there isn't really a good benchmark for response rates. If you go at a large enough scale, and you go at a longer period of time. That said, you might find that there are some clients where the mathematics of cold email or the interest level of their audience means that you expect a 2 to 5% reply rate. And if you don't get that, then something's weird, or something's off, or something's wrong. So it can work both ways. You can have a very low response rate for a client with a very hard value proposition, or who's emailing very widely. And you could have a very high interested or a high response rate for clients that are doing things on a more limited basis, or much more targeted. And sometimes that can be contained within the same client. So for an example of that might be, I might have a really great response rate for my New York City community emails if I was doing that, and a very, very low interested reply rate for emailing every VP of sales in the country, asking them if they're having some sort of deliverability continuity issue or something like that, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Petra? Sorry, it's not a very satisfying answer.
One more thing I want to add on, like the tracking of the response rates, you should also focus on the unsubscribe rates, because in a way, they are also, to a certain degree, a response rate, albeit negative. So it's like, consider them if someone has said to you no. So it will give you an indication of is the targeting right, or is the offer right with what I'm doing here? So
Yeah, and I think the second layer to this is taking the data you're getting back and doing your best to analyze it it can make a lot of sense. An example of that, if you're getting a lot of no's and you investigate it and you're like, oh, the data is actually wrong. A lot of these no's are coming from people that are in a foreign country that we don't even serve. Well, then you take that as an indication to clean your data, look through who you're emailing and fix it, for example. So sometimes in the aggregate, you think you're doing the right thing and you're emailing the right people. But then on the micro level, when you really dig into it, you're seeing the no's, you're seeing the unsubscribes, and you realize I shouldn't even be emailing these people at all anyway. So you can take that into account as well. Cool. Apologies for the background noise here. I'm sure someone can hear it. They're decided to use this exact moment to vacuum the hallway of my office. All right. Any final questions, thoughts? I believe this will be posted on YouTube after the fact. If there's anyone else of your colleagues or whoever else you want to see it or you want to review anything said. We've also done many other webinars this year. I don't know exactly how many, 7 or 8, 6, 7, something like that, maybe more this year, where we cover different topics, some similar things and some different things that you can check out. And if there's anyone here that wants to have a call with someone on our team to talk about your own email deliverability issues or learn more about what Senders does, feel free to do so. Dame, who's on this call, is a technician. So if you have a very specific technical problem or you want to learn more about whatever, have a look at your DNS records or anything like that, this is his calendar. You can book with him directly. Oh, there you go. You did it too. And then, oh, okay. Kathleen wants to have a chat. Cool. Dame, do you want to handle connecting with Kathleen? Kathleen, do you want to just grab a time on?
yeah, ideally, if you can just book a meeting.
Cool. And anyone else have any issues, questions, concerns? You can email me at benny@senders.co, or our director of revenue is chrisley@senders.co. And you can also book a meeting with us via the website. Kathleen would like to speak to Benny. Sure, that's acceptable if you want to speak to Benny. Let's see. Let me grab my Calendly and drop it in here. Actually, Kathleen, do you want to just send me an email? If you send me an email, we can find a time to chat. Nothing personal, of course not. Of course not. You helped him save himself some
I
meeting.
already felt it.
Great. Okay, thank you, everyone. Hope this was helpful. And feel free to send me any questions, comments, concerns, etc. All right. Bye now.